As it were, the original intention was to just make this about the parahuman hybrids of the colloquially named Slaughterhouse 9000. As in, I would basically just name them and then get right into it. However, upon finally getting around to looking up information about said hybrids, I figured, given the small amount there was about them, that I should add information about the Slaughterhouse 9000 as a whole too. One would think, given the broad nature of these Slaughterhouse videos, that I would have included that information in the first place, but well, I don't really plan out my videos that much, if that wasn't evidently obvious. Anyway, to begin, I should emphasize that the Slaughterhouse 9000 name is fan-derived. I only use it since it makes for a better title. Otherwise, I'd probably call this video the final Slaughterhouse or the post-timeskip Slaughterhouse. Speaking of, to follow up on the previous video, note that before the 9 went inactive, they did do a few other things after Brockton Bay, besides recruiting Damsel of Distress, Skinslip, and Night Hag. Suffice to say, they got into some fights and ended up losing the Siberian and Damsel. So, by the time they became active again, their remaining members were Jack Slash, Skinslip, Night Hag, Hookwolf, and Bonesaw. While not as diminished as they were immediately after Brockton Bay, that's quite a far cry from the 9 at their peak, let's say. Luckily, this is where the twist comes in. To give some background, the 9 eventually ended up at a place called Toy Box, a black market organization of tinkers hidden in a pocket dimension. And at said place, they killed everyone and stole all their resources and tech. Afterwards, with said tech, the remaining members went into stasis for 2 years, except Bonesaw. During those 2 years, she did a multitude of things, but there were 2 main ones. Through the use of stolen tech, she made her new hybrids, Laughjob, Nighty Night, Tyrant, Snowmann, and Spawner. She also made the Slaughterhouse clones. Said clones were composed of past members that Bonesaw had available DNA for, and some of the living members. The members that did not seem to be cloned were Jack Slash, Bonesaw, and Hookwolf. The members that were known to be cloned were King, Screamer, Harbinger, Breed, Crimson, Nyx, Psychosoma, Cherish, Hatchetface, Miasma, Murderat, Mannequin, Siberian, Crawler, Winter, Chuckles, Nice Guy, Night Hag, Skinslip, Shadowbird, Burnscar, Damsel of Distress, and Grey Boy. I'll mention that I don't know the status of Pagoda and Hackjob. I'm inclined to say that Bonesaw would not have bothered with them, given all the other options she had with the other clones. But at the same time, another key detail to note was how she made 9 clones of each member, except Grey Boy. Even after she modified him to be more controllable, he was still a lot to handle, even for Jack, so there was only 1 of him. That's important to know because it was stated by the author that at this point the 9 had 281 members. The surviving 5, plus the 5 hybrids, plus the sets of 9 for the mentioned members, plus 1 Grey Boy, only made 209. Assuming there were no other particularly unruly members like Grey Boy, we had 8 unaccounted for sets of 9. I don't think it's the biggest stretch to assume that 2 of those sets of 9 were pagodas and hackjobs. That said, as far as I know, those 8 unknown past Slaughterhouse members that were cloned remain unknown. Additionally, before it degraded, Murderat was, however briefly, considered a real member. Pagoda and Hackjob never were, so I can see why she wouldn't clone them. Now, a part of me kind of hates to say this again, but as scary and effective as those clones were, how they varied from their originals, and how they were made, and how they were used, all together helped contribute to them being weaker and or less dangerous when compared to their originals. First, While Bonesaw tried her best to make them as close to their originals as possible, they were at the end of the day only mostly right. Their memories and personalities were still notably cobbled together, and, in her own words, they were close enough to feel familiar, but when it came to little details, they were still off. As for the general way they carried themselves and how they fought, she described them as close enough. This leads to the second point. While they can and were still effective, and were still capable of reaching the peaks of their originals, given enough time, due to the previously mentioned nature of their creation, they were less fleshed out. They did not have all the experience and knowledge of their originals, and as such, they weren't as capable at fighting and using their powers. In fact, to give a more, let's say, objective metric, their connection to their shard was weaker too. Finally, it's important to keep in mind that Jack didn't really use them as well as he could have. He was noted as using them in ways that would not keep them alive. Essentially, as useful and more effective they could have been if properly deployed and directed, to Jack, they were expendable, and he used them accordingly. That said, it wasn't all bad. Bonesaw did do some additional modifications that somewhat helped mitigate the things going against the clones. First, given the confines of what their given bodies were capable of, each clone was made to be in peak condition, to be the best they could normally physically be. Second, while a bit more uncertain of a detail, she also likely modified them with similar augmentations to the ones she normally gave to the Nine. At the very least, she made them more durable. Third, on a more mental level, she corrected and or sanded down certain counterproductive personality traits and quirks that contributed to their original capture or death. Finally, somewhat related to that, Bonesaw made them more loyal and obedient. Fair enough, that did not necessarily help them, at least directly, but from a purely speculative point of view, I imagine even with his as previously stated reckless use of them, the clones being controllable may have influenced Jack to not use them as reckless as he could have. Basically, it's one thing to not care about what happens to the clones, it's another to also find the entire process of using them one big annoyance. So, for this last bit, it's kind of off topic, but there's really nowhere else to put it. Basically, outside of the changes from the other points, Bonesaw did various other cosmetic and less cosmetic changes to the clones. Some for thematic reasons, some to fit a certain perception, and some so that they could quote-unquote fit who they were before. To name a litany of examples, there was one Chuckles with a bunch of tattoos, a Chuckles with accordion arms, she made Murderat skinny, she made King muscular, and while it never led anywhere, she even tried to see if Damsel triggering at a much younger age would make her stronger. It did not. Right. On to the original focus of this entire dealio. As previously stated in another video, this batch of 5 hybrids, with what little we actually know about them, did seem to be better than the first 3 she made. Surprise, surprise, having 2 years to plan, more resources, better tools, and better base bodies to use, did much to generate better outcomes. Starting with the quicker ones, first, to be blunt, we know nothing about Laughjob. They, as far as I know, only had their name mentioned, and nothing else. We can only rely on speculation to determine what parahumans they were composed of. Based on what their name implied, Laughjob was probably composed of Chuckles and Hatchetface. As such, Brute, Mover, and Trump are likely classifications for them. Now, while it would not have been a direct one-to-one, to at least give you an idea on the type of cape they could have been, recall that Chuckles had super speed in the legs, super strength in the chest and arms, and an altered sense of time that made him perceive things at all times in slow motion. As for Hatchet Face, he also had super strength, and that may have made Laughjob's hypothetical super strength even stronger when paired with the strength of Chuckles. More importantly, Hatchet Face had a power nullification field, something that I've had to mention more than I thought I would, and will continue to mention, as you'll see, well, here. Next, we have Nighty Night. Within the story, she was also basically just a name, but a name with more context. Based on what we know, she was a shaker and a stranger, and she was composed of Nyx and Night Hag. Her power was making poisonous, noxious illusions out of the landscape, and that's all I have. The only other thing I can comment on is how she may have taken more from Nyx based on that little power description. But given the rest of the hybrids, how Night Hag factored in could have been any number of things. Alright, time for Tyrant. First, he was made with clones of King and Hatchet Face. That, along with what was given about his powers, made him a brute, trump, striker, and master. Tyrant retained the powers and physical enhancements of both. Note that he wasn't just super strong and durable similar to King and Hatchet Face, he more specifically had the combined strength and durability of the two. When it comes to King's main power, besides also being able to transfer physical harm to anyone he touched within 24 hours, it's not known how different or not so different Tyrant's version of it was. When it comes to Hatchet Face's power, while the potency of the power nullification seemed to be the same, just like Hackjob, the range of said nullification was shorter. However, unlike Hackjob's range, which was more direct touch distance, Tyrant's range, from what I was able to put together, was 30 feet, 9.14 meters. That's not definitive, mind you. It's, if anything, perhaps a generous interpretation of the one real sequence we have with Tyrant. Within that scene, all we had to go on was that Tyrant was really close. Close enough that Skidder could meet his eyes, but far enough that he still had to travel a few seconds to get to her. Perhaps I'm missing something, but through those vague descriptions, I landed on that earlier speculative range. For number 4, Snowmann. They were made from Mannequin and Winter, and that made them a tinker and a shaker. In terms of physical characteristics, they did take more from Mannequin. However, they were noticeably fatter. Snowmann was 3 times the size of Mannequin, and presumably, because of that increased size, their default physical strength was greater, to the point that they could easily throw Hatchet Face. Granted, however brief it may have been, they could still be entangled and trapped in metal and spider silk netting. Now, keep in mind that the increased strength and size did not seem to slow them down, at least in a significant way. They could still spin like a top with their blades, and more broadly, they were still capable of skipping and dodging around. Evidently not as well as Mannequin, given the fact that they were a bigger target. Though it probably helped that they could use chained grappling hooks to assist with movement. Anyway, another notable difference was the change in weaponry. While they did still have them come out of wrists, elbows, and palms, instead of the refined and sleek blades Mannequin normally used, Snowmann had heavier and uglier blades that were more like axes than swords. Now, when it came to the Winter side of things, Snowmann did retain her ability. It could still slow down projectiles and make one's movements and reaction time sluggish, but the range was ostensibly smaller. If I were to hazard a guess, perhaps 10 feet or 3 meters around them. Other than that, Winter also influenced the Tinker specialization. I can't really say for certain how influenced it was, but at the very least, Mannequin's whole shtick about isolated anti-hazard systems involved ice much more heavily in Snowmann, with the most notable example being the armor Snowmann wore. It was pressurized, and in the event of it being punctured, it would spew out ice that would encase and trap anything and anyone nearby. More so, if it was punctured enough times and or got significantly large punctures, The spewed out ice got so bad that the area around them could be described as a localized blizzard. Finally, Spawner. He was crawler and breed, and he was a master changer and brute. I'd say he took more from breed. Like breed, Spawner could generate bugs that would come out of him. However, unlike breed, who could generally only spawn around 10 or so a day, Spawner could generate hundreds in minutes. Additionally, he could store up to 200, perhaps more, bugs within him, acting as a living walking hive, to the point that his body was restructured and reformed to be quote unquote more gap than physical mass. The bugs would occupy holes in his thighs, buttocks, sides, and back, among other places. The bugs themselves also differed from breeds. They were much more involved with Spawner, not just because of the whole walking hive thing, but also in how they synergized with Spawner himself. I'd say this is probably where the crawler influence comes in. First, while Spawner did more generally have a degree of rapid regeneration, when he was injured, his bugs could do several things to help with the healing. Bugs outside of him could bring back resources to put into Spawner. Bugs within him could go to the site of the wound and fill the void. Some go to just act as resources to be used, some remove or break down material, and some build and replace. In both cases, the bugs helped accelerate his regeneration. Second, would be Spawner's unique ability to somewhat tailor the evolution of his bugs. I do not know how far this could go, but he could feel them form within him. He could feel the chemicals, protein chains, and calcium come together, and while that process was going on, he could adjust their potential speed, size, durability, and coloration. Finally, third, he could feed on things. And while yes, that did help with the generation and evolution of the bugs, it also made him stronger, made him evolve. I do not know to what extent he could evolve. I do not know if it was even possible for him to get to the point Crawler was during the Nine's Brockton Bay visit. However, based on available information, I can only assume that for the breed part of Spawner to be the way it was, the Crawler part was weakened. That said, while he did seem constrained to a mostly humanoid form, he did still have the alterations that helped better facilitate his bugs. He also had multiple sets of black eyes, claws, and even a prehensile tongue. Just because he presumably couldn't get as monstrous as Crawler, he could still very much be his own flavor of monster. Granted, to be fair, Crawler was active for a while. He was on his own for who knows how long, then he was with the Nine for an unknown amount of time, and after that was the 6.5 years between 2005 and mid-2011. In contrast, and without giving too much away, Spawner had around 3 years to evolve. 3 years where I highly doubt he saw nearly as much action as Crawler did with the Nine. Well, that was fun, as that could be, I suppose, for me. Truthfully, I did not actually think that I would get all these Slaughterhouse 9 videos done. Especially after I took that unintended detour to redo the Undersiders. But, well, while it took longer to do than it realistically needed to, here we are. I guess I proved myself wrong. I really don't have much of anything to say. I probably won't be making any videos for a while, but I may stream games in the interim, mostly to get them out of my backlog, and that little bit of extra added streamer pressure, or streaming pressure to be more exact, may be what I need to, get them done. I can also get distracted, but future me, I guess. Or I guess past me, given, right? Regardless, I highly doubt anyone that came for the videos cares all that much about my more or less monotone voice and uninteresting self enough to watch me play video games of all things. Poorly, mind you, and in less than optimal stream quality. Not to mention, I doubt I'd speak all that much in the first place. Anyway, if you're curious, I'm probably going to talk a bit more about video stuff and, well, other stuff in the description. So, yeah, like, subscribe, share, comment, or not. It really doesn't matter. I only say that in part because it amuses me, and in part because a sick part of me wants to feel that small pinch of cringe whenever I say those things. Goodbye. Take care.